to go over anything on that? ABV difference, pressure differences?
She said we needed to know the formula. We can go over that again.
Which one?
The stroke volume and heart rate.
Q?
Yeah. For everyone.
I totally knew what you were talking about.
That one?
No. She wrote it on the board. That's not the one.
QHR times stroke volume. That one. So Q is cardiac output. Right. How much blood is pumped per minute? And you can calculate Q by heart rate and stroke volume. Stroke volume is how much blood is ejected per squish, per contraction. So per beat, blood per beat, beats per minute gives me blood per minute.
Q stands for cardiac output. Q stands for cardiac output.
Output, yes. And then the stroke volume, if you imagine the heart as a glass, if you look at the ventricle, then you've got, at the end of systole is the contraction phase, diastole is the relaxation phase. So when we take blood pressure in lab, you've got systolic and diastolic blood pressure, right? 120 over 80. So systole is the high number, the contraction. Diastole is the lower number, the relaxation. So when the heart relaxes, when the ventricle relaxes, it fills up with blood. Right? And you can measure, given sophisticated equipment, that amount of blood. And that's called the end diastolic volume. Right? It's just how much blood is in the heart at the end of the relaxation phase. Okay? So that's EDV. When you contract and you squeeze the blood out around the body, then you never squeeze it all out. There's always some left in the bottom of the heart. Right? So I can measure that, and that's the volume of blood at the end of the contraction phase. So stroke volume is the difference, what came out. Okay? So that is stroke volume. And you want to understand that idea because when we train, when we do aerobic training, we do a lot of running or we do a lot of biking, we do endurance work, we can affect those two volumes and we can increase stroke volume. Okay? I can change how much blood comes out. So I can get more blood in, and because the muscle gets stronger, I can squeeze a little bit more out, and so I can increase stroke volume with training. Make sense? So then that explains why we see lower heart rate in people who train, because Q represents how much blood I need to do work. Right? So, given the work is the same, Q doesn't need to change. But when we do endurance work, what happens to heart rate? If I do a lot of endurance training, what happens to my resting heart rate? It goes down. But at rest, I don't need any more blood, or any less blood. I didn't lose an organ, right? My blood requirement is the same, but heart rate goes down when I train. The only way it can go down, if this stays the same, is because stroke volume goes up. All right? Make sense? Okay, what else? Anything else from cardiovascular system?
We have to know the graph.
Hmm?
We have to know like the graph of the heart, like the chambers and stuff. Like
Diagram?
Yeah.
Well, your anatomy, you need to understand the anatomy of the heart, because otherwise the adaptations to training and what we see happen don't make sense. So you've got to, that's why you have to have A and P before you do X-rays, because, yeah. So, look at adaptation. What about blood flow? High and low. Things go from high to low. We're okay with that.
In the tour. Do you know anything about the electrocardiogram?
No. No, the ECG, I like to cover the ECG work because I just think it's interesting. You can see the relaxation phase and the contraction phase. And also, if you have anyone in the family that has heart issues and they have an ECG, you can see how that's different. Right? You can often pick up, particularly after a heart attack, the peaks on the ECG are lower. Training effects, so make sure adaptations in blood pressure, all right, look at those. And then did plasma volume, red blood cells, adaptations to plasma volume, AVO2 difference, that's all fine. Big equation. Okie dokie. All right, in that case, we are starting on the respiratory system. And just to make it worthwhile coming today, we're going to have an in-class question. So you can try it now for 2 points, and then you can have another go at the end for a point if you didn't get it right the first time.
You said 20 points?
No, not 20.
Street break? Staying here?
Hopefully going on. Depends how long it takes me to grade your projects.
Should they long because they're only like 10 minutes.
Because they're brilliant,
Yeah.
that'll make it easier.
You just give us all.
When they're good, it makes it a lot easier to grade them.
It's going to be easy.
All right, so can you let Jace back in, please? question is, what is responsible for air rushing in and out of the lungs?
Say that again?
What's responsible? What causes air to rush in and out of the lungs? It's not the right spelling, but I know what you mean.
I can spell check this.
Spell check? You don't need spell check.
It's not hard.
See, you guys don't do your reading before you come to class, do you?
Good. Too busy reading other classes.
Anything? Any attempts? Alright, so.
ATP cycle. Look at it.
Alright, so let's start the respiratory system. And we'll see how far we can get, and then we'll finish this off after spring break. Right? Okay, so usual job on the objectives, make sure you check the list at the front of the chapter, see if I took any out. Those would be things you don't need to spend heaps of time on, because I'm not going to do too much work on those. All right. Anatomy, that doesn't look very good today. Anatomy of the respiratory system, again, you should have done this in A and P. Right. So I don't have time to spend a lot of time doing structure. Right. What we're going to be concentrating on is occurring at the level of the alveoli. So if you don't remember, bronchial tubes, lung tissue, alveoli, capillary network, go back to your A&P notes and look at the textbook. They do a good job in the textbook. So, we want air in and out of the lungs. And the function of the respiratory system is to get that air in and out and to supply a membrane to exchange gas from the air across and into the bloodstream. Right? We go all the way back to the beginning of the semester and we were looking at energy systems. What do we need at the end of energy system 3 to continue making ATP?
Oxygen.
Oxygen, all right. So it doesn't just soak in through our skin, all right? We have to have a way of getting oxygen into the bloodstream. Right? So it's a very sophisticated mechanism that we have in place, right? The other thing that the respiratory system allows for is humidifying the air so that we don't dry the very delicate tissues in the lung out so that the gas can't move backwards and forwards. So when we breathe in the nasal cavity, we have mucus, some of that moisture gets into the air, and we try to keep it from drying out, right? Warms the air and filters. Some people have a better filtering system than others. Some of us have really bad allergies because the filtering system isn't doing the job. We are more sensitive to the allergens, but it would be a lot worse if we didn't breathe in and out through a cavity that has little hairs to try and catch the allergens. Right. So, we get down to our alveoli, then we're looking at a structure that's like a little round sac, and the whole structure is surrounded by a netting of capillaries. And we want to keep that alveoli working well. That means we don't want cold, dry air in our lungs. So, if you go skiing somewhere that's very cold and the humidity is low, the snow's very crunchy, very crunchy, it's not damp, then a lot of people will use a scarf over their mouth, something like that, to try to warm the air up. Right? When you go outside and run and it's cold, that's harder than when it's warm. So, alveoli is the point at which we see this gas exchange occur, because the capillary, the blood, is so close to the lung tissue at that point. As we'll see, it's really tiny. And there's somewhere around 300 million alveoli in your lungs. A lot of them. Right? So, if I cut them all open and laid them out on the floor, you actually have enough surface area with those alveoli to cover a tennis court. Okay? That's crucial. The reason we have these little sac-like structures and not just a flat surface of a lung, so when you look at George's lungs, right, this is nowhere near detailed enough. Because it looks just like a lump of flat tissue. And when you look at it, it's all these tiny, tiny little bubbles almost. Okay? Because all those little round sacs provide a wider surface area for air to blood transfer. The respiratory membrane is then the membrane of the lung and the membrane of the capillary. Oh, hold on. So, why are the diagrams so faint today? So, here's my alveolus, all right? One of 300 million. If I slice that through and look at the slice, this is why they're so useful, because the entire surface of the capillary is surrounded by blood vessels. That means that we've got a lot of contact between the lung and the bloodstream. Oxygen's going in, carbon dioxide is coming off the hemoglobin and the red blood cells back out into the lungs so we can breathe out. Yeah, thank you. Okay. So here I've got, I breathe in, I've got a high amount of oxygen in the atmosphere. I can move oxygen out to the bloodstream. I'm producing carbon dioxide when I make ATP. Carbon dioxide we can't use, plants can use it. So we want to get rid of it. We transport it back to the lungs. It comes off the red blood cell into the lungs and we breathe it out. Right? We love our plants. Right? They take the carbon dioxide, they breathe it in, they breathe out oxygen, we breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide. Nice symbiotic relationship, and then we go and chop all the trees down. Not a good plan. Okay. Not a good plan. So, how do we breathe? Right? What is actually going on when we breathe? So, the mechanism, the reason we can breathe, the cause for the breathing is the pressure change. So what we see is, this is why hopefully you got the high-low pressure gradient last week. Okay. You've got to have a pressure gradient for liquids or gases to move from one place to another place. In this case, we're looking at gas, and what we want to do is increase the volume of the thorax, of the cavity, and that decreases the pressure in the lungs. So if I decrease the pressure in the lungs so that it's lower than the pressure in the atmosphere, the air rushes into the lungs. So we're always going to go high to low. Right? If we're looking at blood or water or anything like that, it goes from high to low. If we're looking at gases, they move from high pressure to low pressure. So, in order to breathe in, inspiration, I have to go from high to low. So in this case, the high is the atmosphere, and the low is the lung. Okay? I decrease the pressure in the lungs, air can rush into the lung. When I want to breathe out, we don't exactly breathe out. Right? We want to increase the pressure in the lungs so that it's higher than the atmosphere, and then the air will move out. So when we're breathing out during expiration, the lung is high and the atmosphere is the low. Questions? So if my intrathoracic pressure is higher, I breathe out. If my intrathoracic pressure is lower, I breathe in. Got it? Now, how do I change the lung volume, right? How do I do that? We have to use the diaphragm. That's the most important respiratory muscle to expand the lungs and decrease the pressure. Okay? But the air rushing in, the change in the pressure is the thing that causes the air to rush in. And there's some nice figures in the book help you out with that. Alright, so we want lots of airflow. Alright, same principle as blood flow. Okay. Pressure difference over resistance gives me airflow. So that means I can either change the pressure difference or I can change the resistance to the airflow. Right? So I can alter the diameter of the airways to increase airflow. Right? We don't tend to do that thinking about it. It's unconscious. But bronchodilation, when we exercise, decreases resistance to airflow. So when we start to move, we get a signal from the brain that causes the bronchial tubes to open up a little bit so we can get more air in to the lungs. By people who have asthma, or if you've got a chest infection or something like that, it's difficult to exercise because you start to exercise and bronchodilation doesn't occur effectively because you've got asthma or you've got some impedance going on there because of the infection, and then you can't get enough air in to do the exercise efficiently, right? When you watch sport, sometimes you see athletes put those little nasal strips on, right? I haven't seen any research yet that suggests that those work effectively. The idea is that they increase the diameter of the nasal cavity and help get more air in, but there isn't research to support that they work very well. The other thing that we do when we start to exercise, if you ride your bike for a while or you run for a while, you guys are probably too fit to see it when you're walking, but if you go for a run, at some point you'll switch from breathing through your nose to breathing through your mouth. Unconsciously, usually, your brain will just switch it over to breathing through your mouth because the passage from the mouth is much bigger than the passage from the nose. Right? So your brain goes, okay, I need more air, more oxygen. I need to breathe in through my mouth instead so I can get larger volume of air in. The problem with that is if you have a lot of allergies, now you're bypassing the thing that's built in to try to filter out the macrophages and the allergens. So when we have allergy issues and we go out for a run, you've got to try to work out what point of the day are your allergies the worst. Don't go out and exercise at that point of the day because you're going to start breathing through your mouth. If you try to make yourself breathe through your nose, it's actually quite hard. Once your brain has made the switch, it's difficult to keep up that level of work and make it switch back. You have to concentrate quite hard on breathing through your nose. Okay. So, pulmonary ventilation, did we calculate that in lab already? Did you guys do that in lab? There was a guesstimate. If you haven't, you will be. There's an estimate equation so that you can estimate your ventilatory equivalent. How much air is moved in and out of the lungs in a given time period, usually a minute. So, VE is the equivalent of Q for gas, right, for your lungs. So how much air is moved in and out per minute? Q is how much blood moves out of the heart per minute. Right. VT is how much air is moved per breath. So like stroke volume, VT is the equivalent of stroke volume. How much blood is moved out per beat, how much air is moved per breath. And F is frequency, same as heart rate. So this equation is exactly the same as the Q equals stroke volume times heart rate. It's just the respiratory equivalent. In a trained endurance athlete, we see much larger ability to move air around than we do in someone who's not trained. Okay. For a sedentary male, their VE, so how much air per minute, somewhere around 8 litres per minute for a sedentary male. And when they're exercising, it can go up to around 112, 113. But when you look at someone who's trained, then a trained person can get up to 183 litres per minute. So a massive difference in airflow in and out of the lungs. And therefore, because the air has the oxygen, right? If I can get more air in, I can get more oxygen, I can make more ATP. So, positive adaptation. Usually positive when we're looking at adaptations. Okay. When you start to run or you start to train, what happens to your breathing rate? Gets faster, right? Might get deeper, okay? So we see that as an adaptation. We increase the depth first. So again, you're not always aware of the fact that you're breathing a little bit deeper. You do tend to be quite aware of the point in which you start breathing faster. Okay? But first you'll increase how big the breath is, and then if that doesn't provide enough oxygen for the work that you're doing, your brain will increase how fast you're breathing. Question? Keeping track? We're okay?
For about 5 more minutes.
For about 5 more minutes. Okay.
Have you seen there's like becoming popular with the new, like the elevation mask? A bunch of athletes are starting to use them.
Oxygen masks?
Are
Yeah.
those proven to like be effective?
They do help. We'll cover those a little bit later on in the semester. They do help with the recovery. They don't help with the actual exercise. I think that's the right way around.
You
Without
mean
checking.
oxygen mask where you take in oxygen?
Mhm.
Although it's
So
not
these are you can buy different, like pretty much buy different elevations, but they're just a mask that go on and they have like holes where you can breathe through, but you can like pretty much almost like shut the air coming through. Like,
Oh,
the
so it,
elevation higher.
okay. So it mimics going up to
Higher
elevation.
elevation. Aerobics, right, becoming popular now.
Yeah, they simulate altitude.
Ah,
Yeah. And I didn't know if they,
No, I haven't.
they were effective or like
I haven't.
work.
no, see, if they effectively mimic elevation, they would work. But I haven't seen them. I'll see if I can do a little bit of digging around.
You should be a science project.
Science project. I just need one of those. But no, I hadn't seen them. It's like a little portable environment tent.
Yeah.
Interesting. So it'll be interesting to see what the International Olympic Committee says. Because didn't they make oxygen tents?
They're still legal, the oxygen tanks.
They
for
are?
sure. They're just really sketchy. But they're living in those.
Could you put
If you're I think they're not gonna say anything because they only happen when you're training. They're not gonna wear it all day.
Yeah, because back when I was training for the Olympics.
Huh.
This one says that it's
Can you email that to me?
Hmm?
Thank you.
I think they're ready to study.
If you email it to me, I'll see if I can find any research.
It says increased lung capacity.
Well, that's not possible. So
That's
it's
not
DNA.
possible.
Yeah, because your lungs
That's a
are-
little bit of a
their
thing.
DNA.
It would increase your red blood cell count a little bit. I guess if you wore it every day. I wonder if they're sleeping in them.
Oh, that'd be bad.
just
You can
training.
simulate altitudes of like 3,000, 6,000, 9,000, 12,000, 15,000, 18,000 feet in altitude resistance.
You can die,
Okay, email it to me and I'll do some digging and I'll see what I can find for when we meet after spring break. All right, so ultimately what we're looking for then is moving oxygen in particular across the membrane into the bloodstream. So we've got the fact that we've got a very large surface area, helps us out with that. And we have a very thin, even though it's the membrane of the lungs and the membrane of the bloodstream, it's very, very thin at that point. Okay? We've only got 2 cells. So it's not a big distance to diffuse the gas across the membrane. And we have pressure differences all the way through the system, but in particular between the atmosphere, the alveoli, and the bloodstream. Right. Partial pressure is just because we don't only have oxygen, we've got a mix of gases, so we have a pressure at sea level, 180 millimeters of mercury, but it's got some oxygen, some nitrogen, some carbon dioxide, so those gases have their own partial pressure, part of the whole. All right, I don't know why this is. It's never this faint. I wonder if the bulb is going. All right, this is in your book though, so that'll help you out. So what we're looking at here, we'll go over this and then we'll call it a day and we'll pick it up and we'll review it after spring break, all right? Because this is the tricky bit. So, my atmospheric pressure, if I'm looking at oxygen, the partial pressure of oxygen in the atmosphere at sea level is 159 millimeters of mercury. Right? When I look in the lungs, the pressure, partial pressure of oxygen is 105. So I have a pressure differential, 159 to 105. Things move from high to low. It's not a massive pressure difference, but it's a pressure difference. So the oxygen can move from the atmosphere into the lungs. That's great. Now we've got to get it into the bloodstream. So when we look at the partial pressure of oxygen in the venous blood coming into the lungs from the heart, it's only 40 millimeters of mercury. Well, it's 105 in the lungs, and it's 40 in the bloodstream coming to the lungs. So, which way is the oxygen moving? It's always going to go high to low. Right? So here I have 105.
So then you,
Here I have 40.
did you help?
So I can move oxygen out of the lungs into the bloodstream. High to low. So when I look at the partial pressure of oxygen in the arterial blood, leaving the lungs to go back to the heart, I've managed to get it up to 100. So I managed to get a lot of oxygen into the bloodstream, from 40 to 100. So we loaded a lot of oxygen out of the lungs and into the bloodstream. Goes back to the heart, gets pumped out of the heart, off around the body. We don't use any oxygen at the heart, because the heart doesn't take oxygen from the blood that's inside it, it has its own blood supply. So when I measure it the other side of the heart, it's the same as it was going in, 100. We come down to the body, and the goal is to get the oxygen out and into the body tissue, particularly in our case the muscles. Okay? We want oxygen in the muscles so we can make ATP. And that's what we see, because when we measure the blood going back to the heart, the partial pressure of oxygen dropped down again. So we dumped a load of oxygen out, pressure drops down, comes back to the heart, gets pumped back to the lungs, picks up oxygen, and off we go again. If, when you're thinking about this high-low, think of a car on a hill. So, if I have a really steep hill, okay, here's my car, and my car is the oxygen. Okay. What we want is pressure difference. We want a large pressure gradient. So the pressure gradient is the hill. So the steeper the hill, the steeper the pressure gradient. What happens when I take the handbrake off this car? Rolls down the hill, right? How quickly does it go down the hill? Fast, right? So the steeper the pressure gradient, the faster I can move oxygen across that membrane. What if I have a hill that isn't as steep?
So slower.
It goes slower when I take the handbrake off, right? But it will still go because we're on a hill. So we still have a pressure gradient, but it's not as steep, so the oxygen moves more slowly across the membrane. What if the car is parked on the flat and I take the handbrake off? Does it move at all when I take the handbrake off if it's parked on the flat?
Oh, no.
No. Right? So if there's no pressure gradient, if the pressure both sides of the membrane is the same, oxygen can't move. Okay? Think about that. I know it's spring break. I know we are all tired and we all need a break. However, a week and a half without looking at this stuff will make the exam very difficult. So try towards the end of the week, once you've had a bit of a break, to do some review. Alright? And make your life a little bit easier when you get back. If you're leaving town, drive carefully, have fun.